Yeehaw!
Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to Smith Classic Cars. This is my 1920 Chevy Touring car. I bought this car in 1994, mostly in a box. Paid $4,000 for it. Needed a lot of work. I found it outside my Uncle Chris's house. It was on a trailer. He was trying to sell it for a friend. And I fell in love with it. I had to have it. It was, in my mind, the perfect old car because it looks like it should be pulled by a horse. Anyway, needed a lot of work. It took a while to restore, but I had the help of my brother and my dad, so that made it a lot easier and a lot more special. Let me pull it out so you get a better look at it. The 28 Chevy National Series came in multiple body styles. You could buy just the chassis for about $375, or the top of the line Imperial Landau for about $700. This is the Touring, and was the cheapest of the lineup. For 28, the wheelbase was stretched to accommodate the soon-to-come 6-cylinder engine. It was also restyled, one of the first projects from GM's Art and Color Studio. It was lower profile, had a longer and straighter hood, flowing fender lines, and the so-called smoothly integrated body panels. This is not the first 28 Chevy in the Smith family. Back in Michigan, my grandfather had a 28 sedan they named Chris, after St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers. That car meant so much to my Uncle Bob that he had to bring a piece of it with him to California. He removed the instrument panel, and it was meant to be that so many years later I would be drawn toward this 28, and he would give the instrument panel to me for this car. Here's your temperature gauge. Standard equipment for 28 included inside rear view mirror, stoplight, parking lights, door pockets, and gas gauge. How's that for fully loaded? But more important for 28, Chevy adopted four-wheel brakes. Hey, it's nice to be able to stop. And while it sat for a bit while I focused on career and family, it came together with the help of my dad and brother. Just in time for my first baby girl, McKenna. In fact, we were fitting the top when my wife Colleen called and said her water broke. Let's have a look at the interior. On the wheel we have throttle and timing advance levers, and the ever-popular klaxon, or ahooga horn. There's room enough to seat four comfortably. I installed some seat belts to keep my girls from bouncing out. And there's some storage in the doors and under the seats. The steel body was built around and tacked to a wooden frame, techniques previously used for building horse-drawn carriages. The pedals are standard layout from left to right, clutch, brake, and throttle, with the addition of the starter button on the far right. The instrument panel includes the light switch, speedometer, and oil and amp gauges. And here it is before I restored it. The original instrument panel from the Smith family car back in Michigan. St. Christopher pendant, of course. Homage to the original Smith family car in Michigan. Under the hood we have a 4-cylinder engine. For 28 it had larger valves, aluminum pistons, higher compression, and a new carburetor. All that made it good for about 35 horsepower at 2200 RPM. Making room for the 6-cylinder engine that would come in 29 required a rather large fan shroud that you can see there. The engine uses a splash lubrication system, so we have an oil can for oiling the top end and accessories. That horizontal can there is a centrifugal air filter. It creates a vortex that separates out the dust. I've added a modern coil, and on the distributor we have a grease cup to lube the bearing. Fill it with grease and screw it down to force grease into the bearing. There's no pressure lube at the top end, so the top end needs to be oiled by hand. Taking the valve cover off, you'll see a felt pad that holds oil to keep the rocker assembly lubricated. The bottom end is splash lubricated. As the connecting rods rotate, they splash oil to the working surfaces like wrist pins and cylinder walls. It has an updraft carburetor, and this is the vacuum tank that brings fuel to the engine. Vacuum pulls fuel from the gas tank until the float rises, shutting off the vacuum. Here's the petcock to turn the flow of gas off and on. On the generator, you can see one of the many oilers to keep the moving parts lubricated. I love the period advertising. You can see here the price in 27 was $525 for the touring car, and it was even cheaper in 1928. It was $50 less in 28 because Chevy was competing with Ford's cheaper and all-new Model A. The price reduction worked, and Chevy was once again the sales leader in 1928. So a lot of people ask me, hey, James, how do you start that thing? It's pretty old. Would you start with a match? No, people don't really ask that, but some might ask, do you start it with a hand crank? And well, in 1903, they came out with the first patent for electric start, and the first car, the Cadillac, 1912, had electric start. And after that, in about 1920, most all cars had electric starter. They retained an option to crank start it. So past this little cover right here, you put a crank in there, and you give it a go. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Alright, here's the crank handle here. Pro tip is to make sure your thumb is not wrapped around the handle here. Very important, because if it backfires, it could break your thumb. Grab the handle like so, making sure your thumb's not wrapped around. Insert the handle in here. You want to push it through and pull it through such that you're not pushing it down to try and start it, because if it backfires, it could break your wrist. You want to be pulling through straight up. Keep your head out of the way. Your thumb underneath the handle, not wrapped around it. Alright, when you're using the hand crank to start it, it's nice to have a partner, but if you're doing it by yourself, it's easy enough. Make sure the handbrake is pulled. Make sure it's in neutral. It's very important. You don't want it to start and run over you. Then you're going to go up here and make sure that your timing is retarded. This is advanced. This is retarded on this particular car. You can open the throttle a little bit, but for this car, it's not really required. And then reach down here and turn the ignition switch on. Pull straight through, and Bob's your uncle. Piece of cake. All right, let's go for a drive. So she has a 3-speed transmission, which is pretty standard for the time. No synchro mesh like the Buick. So it takes a bit of finesse to get it to shift without grinding gears. So I double clutch it. Let me show you what that looks like. I also short shifted a bit. So you're not going to win any races taking out from a dead stop. And it's not really a freeway flyer. Of course, maybe Maybe with LA traffic, you might be able to get it on the freeway. But it goes around town really nice. It's a lot of fun. It might go a little faster, but I don't go much faster than about 35, which is good enough around town. My Uncle Bob would say that these were so slow that you could count the blades of grass as you were driving down the road. Yeah, he's about right. We're in top gear now. It's geared pretty tall, so 35 is not hard to get. In terms of RPM, it's just chugging along. These things were built to have some nice low-end torque, not high RPM, that's for sure. And you can tell if you want to push it above 35 or 40 or so, you can really hear it. It's starting to work too hard, and I just don't want to push it that hard. She drives really smooth. You can see I've got my hands off the wheel and it's not wandering too much. Not a lot of shakes or shimmies or rattles. It's a little play in the steering wheel, but hey, she's almost 100 years old. This is 1928. So she's got mechanical brakes. Everything's mechanical. There's no hydraulics, no computers. I mean, it's your basic car. And it stops just fine. You gotta give yourself a little extra time and a little extra pedal pressure, but it stops okay. None of my cars are terribly special from a collector's standpoint, but they're special to me, and they all have a story, and that's what really matters. Like all my cars, it wasn't just me putting them together. For the Datsun and the 57 Chevy, it's predominantly me. Very little help from others, but with this car I got the help of my brother and my dad, and it makes it more special. And with this instrument cluster from my Uncle Bob from the original 28 in Michigan, how much more special can you get than that? Okay, that's all for this episode of Smith Classic Cars. I hope you enjoyed my 1928 Chevy touring car. I certainly enjoyed showing it to you. We'll see you next time. Jackie on the left, McKenna on the right.